We got everybody in the house tonight. We got Scorpion and Spider. Well, Spider and Scorpion symbolism. And who better else to bring in but the tarot man himself, Mario from Symbolic Studies. Mario, thank you so much for jumping on with us tonight and covering this topic with us. That's what's up. Let all the people who don't know who you are yet, all the new listeners, know where they can find your amazing work, please, sir.
Yeah, for sure. So people can go to symbolicstudies.com and there they can find my YouTube and my Instagram, Twitter, all that kind of stuff. I do a lot of short form videos. I just released a new one today about the relationship with Sagittarius and the rainbow, which is pretty interesting. But if people go to my YouTube, they'll find longer form content on my live tab, and I have presentations and things like that. But they can find everything on my site.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I forgot. I think it was probably the last episode we were on. Somehow we ended up talking about scorpion and snake symbolism. Scorpion and spider symbolism. My bad. I've used them myself recently, just in artwork that I've done, and I do think it's, my opinion, they're things that are used a lot in occultism. So I guess, like, what got you even kind of like looking into that stuff or picking that stuff up, Mario, if you don't mind me asking? Or was it just something that came along through tarot and just looking at art?
Right. I mean, Scorpio is a sign that's really
Yeah.
huge. There's so much like information connected to Scorpio. And so a lot of people say that that's the deepest sign in astrology. There's three emanations, which kind of tells you about its depth, right? It's a scorpion, it's a serpent, it's also an eagle slash phoenix. And so with Scorpio, I've done a ton of work with that sign. That was actually the first sign I ever made any content about. So Halloween season, 2020 is when I started putting out content, and so I was covering the death card and things like that. Scorpio is well known for corresponding with like sex and death. So it's always been an interesting sign. And then spider symbolism to me actually wasn't something that came online until maybe like a year and a half ago or something like that. And it's really interesting. I think the conversation we had that kind of kickstarted having this stream tonight is the fact that there are kind of some people out there suggesting that if there's a creature or an animal that represents the current age, it might be eight-legged. So Thomas Sheridan, he's an interesting guy. He made a couple of videos about the octopus
Mm.
being sort of like the totem animal of the current age. And he went into all of these different reasons why. And he is interested in Lovecraftian stuff. And so the octopus is very much
Oh,
like
yeah.
tied to that, right?
Yeah.
But then the number 8 in and of itself is interesting. And then kind of in the background too, I've had conversations with several friends about the nature of the spider and spider symbolism kind of being a thing. And so that was kind of a weave with a few of my friends in person that we would talk about. And then just before this stream, I had mentioned that one of my friends has had some like astral sort of dream like experiences with like a spider queen. And spider symbolism relates heavily to the feminine for sure. So there's so many examples of this. Same thing with Scorpio. So there's a lot of things that kind of overlap between the two. So maybe that could be a good place to start, is sort of like what is relatable between the two. So they're both arachnids, the scorpion and the spider. There's the eight-legged dynamic between the two. Like I said, very, very feminine. The spider is known for being like a weaver and a spinner, basically. And so spinning symbolism, there's so much feminine stuff kind of going on there in and of itself. I have some old moon cards, some old tarot cards that correspond with the moon, and you actually see spinners, like women like spinning thread and stuff like that, like on that card. And so even the moon has like all of this stuff related to the spider. And so you're going to see a lot of lunar symbolism kind of baked into the spider. The fact that the spider too draws things in, right? It's like the web itself is like a snare or a trap. That's really feminine. Women are receptive. Women are so magnetic. Opportunities, men, everything comes to them. They don't have to go anywhere. It's more of man's nature to go out and travel and conquest and whatever.
Yeah,
And
that's
so I've
even,
been
I think,
talking about that. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I think you've even brought that up before in the past, kind of like the whole idea with the king and the queen. The queen stays home and the king goes out and fights the battles.
That's it.
No, they go on.
All you really have to do is just look at our reproductive organs and how they work, right? So it's the sperm of man that kind of leaves home and goes on a journey and travels, right? And then it's the eggs of a woman that'll stay in the confines of her body and to become inseminated to actually create a baby. And so the feminine is way more passive that way. The masculine is more projective. I even think of the bow and arrow. So literally, it's the arrow that leaves, it's the phallus that leaves, but it's the bow that stays with the archer, right? And that bow is very, very feminine. Um, so there's a whole aspect of the spider being receptive that way and kind of ensnaring, what it feeds on. And then also too with the feminine thing, there's a lot of like dark mother symbolism associated with both the spider and the scorpion. So even the spider dynamic with it eating its mate, right? I don't know how many like species of spiders that actually like happens with, but that's definitely a thing. There's actually a great movie. Has anyone here seen Under the Skin?
No.
It's completely related to this. It's really fantastic. I'm not going to give too much away, but it's about the whole entire dynamic of luring men in and kind of like taking advantage of them. It's like a sci-fi horror movie. Scarlett Johansson's actually in it, and it blew me away. I saw it in the theater once, but it relates to some of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about tonight. Probably the most interesting thing that I wanted to bring up, and we have so many like intelligent panelists here. I want to give people time to talk. I came across a book called Arachne Rising, and I didn't read it from cover to cover, but I got the gist of what this guy was trying to propose. And it kind of weaves in like spider symbolism, Scorpio symbolism, and even the number 13. It's Friday the 13th, right? And the number 13 is like really, really intriguing to me. But this guy was trying to make the case that there's a constellation, kind of like a hidden constellation. And there's a lot of lost constellations. There's even a book I've been wanting to get for years, literally titled Lost Constellations. Constellations that were acknowledged way back in the day that people don't acknowledge. Obviously, this is like always an evolving sort of thing. But he was saying that there's a constellation that is called Arachne, and it's a spider. And he was trying to make the case that this is actually the true hidden 13th sign, right? The true hidden 13th constellation. And I just thought it was interesting, and I'm always willing to hear people out, and maybe it becomes relevant later or whatever. But what I thought was really intriguing was that he was placing it directly opposite of Ophiuchus, which is what most people say is like the 13th sign, right? So most people, when they make this claim, I've heard people make the claim of the Pleiades is the 13th constellation, Arachne being the 13th constellation, Ophiuchus being the 13th constellation. So the fact that Arachne is opposite Ophiuchus, I thought was really intriguing. Ophiuchus is right in between Scorpio and Sagittarius. And even a lot of people say that the arrow of Sagittarius is pointing towards Ophiuchus, or that the stinger of the scorpion is pointing towards Ophiuchus. And right in this area, too, is where a lot of people say is the galactic center as well. And that's actually what these constellations are kind of pointing towards or whatever. What I've heard through authors who are really interested in like the polar tradition and primordial tradition, I've heard it be said that Ophiuchus symbolically is the exit off of the zodiac. It's almost like a bend in a river, something along these lines. And it actually takes you to the northern portion of the sky. So it's almost like a bend towards the inner portion of the ecliptic, basically. And Ophiuchus is more northern than all of the other signs along the ecliptic, the path of the sun, right? And Ophiuchus also, people say that it's ruled by Mercury, too, which is really interesting. And so that makes a lot of sense because Ophiuchus is like the serpent bearer, the serpent handler. And there's a lot of serpentine symbolism with Mercury and stuff like that. And the healing arts and stuff like that comes into play, I would say, with all three of these signs, Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Ophiuchus. And so I've heard it be said that Ophiuchus is the exit from the zodiac, and it being the 13th sign, the number 13 breaks, to me, the way I put it, my words, right? It kind of breaks a solar spell. And the number 12 is heavily related to this solar spell, this solar dynamic, this solar age that we kind of live in right now. You've got the 12 signs of the zodiac, right? You've got 12 numbers on a standard clock, right? And the clockwise rotation of the hands that we see on all clocks, that's more of a solar rotation. To go counterclockwise is actually more of a polar rotation. The solar rotation is more expansive, like the rays of the sun, more projective, more masculine. The polar rotation is more contractive and goes towards the center, goes towards the pole. This is why in Islam, you go to the Mecca, you go to, Mecca, you go to the Kaaba cube, you go around the Kaaba cube 7 times. You go counterclockwise because
Right.
you're actually going towards the center. You're getting closer to Mother, basically. The Kaaba cube is a symbol of the Mother, pretty much, right?
Mm.
It even literally has a veil. It's called a kiswa. And so they create a new veil every single year. And veil symbolism heavily ties into Virgo symbolism. This
Right.
is when, the virgin wears the veil, right? And then the veil is lifted on her wedding day when she symbolically no longer is a virgin, right? But virginity used to mean something else way back in the day. It meant unwed, pretty much, not physical virginity. So you could still have had sex, but technically, or I guess in using the old language, you were still a virgin, pretty much.
Well,
So anyway,
virginity mostly applied to women back in the
oh
day.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
that makes sense. That makes perfect sense, exactly. Um, and so the number 13 basically breaks the harmony of the 12 sign system that most people follow. So with a 12 sign system, you have this perfect sort of gridded circle, right? You have 4 quadrants, you have this cross, right? And then in each quadrant, you have 3 signs, giving you 12 signs in total. If we had 13 signs, it breaks that harmony. And so it's actually the number 13 does break sort of this solar spell like I'm referring to. And the number 13 is the card in the tarot that corresponds with death. And so the death kind of breaks a cycle in itself, right? With what it represents and everything else. And the death card is what corresponds with Scorpio as well. So again, Scorpio relates to sex and death. And so there's an interesting dynamic with Scorpio and the number 13 and even Sagittarius. Sometimes Sagittarius's tail used to have a stinger at the end of it, literally a scorpion tail. And so, and even sometimes too, Death used to carry a bow and arrow and not have an actual scythe with them, which kind of corresponds to the archer and things like that. And so what I've kind of heard over time is that this exit, this Ophiuchus sort of gateway out of the solar cycle of things, is basically it's a polar sign. It's a northern sign. It's actually encouraging you to go back to an older sky clock. So what I've talked about before is that the path of the sun and the modern sky clock that is astrology, modern astrology, is a newer construct, basically. But in the primordial age, a long, long time ago, the sky clock was Ursa Major and Minor. And so Ophiuchus kind of encourages you to go back to a polar sort of dynamic, a polar age, and polar wisdom and things like that.
well,
I actually
Mario,
wonder. Go ahead.
Mario, if you could imagine those two snakes being like a branch and the rest of the zodiac being the fruit, and we're hanging off of the northern pole, right? So it's like not only exit but also entrance. So it's like we're sort of that fruit hanging off of the vine or the branch.
Yeah, 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 totally. No, I can totally see that for sure. Um, so Scorpio creates like an axis with Taurus as well, which is really interesting. And what I've basically heard, because Taurus and Scorpio are opposite each other, is that in this primordial age, the main exit to the other side, to the heavens, this stairway to heaven idea, existed in the northern sky. And that the pole star was kind of this star that basically was an indicator of where the exit from this cave actually is, right? And during this transition from a polar age to a solar age, the axis shifted. So kind of the gateway to the other side shifted. And what I've heard is that the Pleiades and Taurus kind of acted as this new sort of mark that indicated this exit out or this exit in. And that this new axis basically went to the northern sky through the pole star along the lines of what's referred to as the world axis or axis mundi. And then now, basically, a lot of people acknowledge that the Pleiades and Taurus, or sorry, the Pleiades, Taurus, and Scorpio kind of operates as this new axis because it's along the path of the sun. And when people became more solar, they wanted to find this new gateway that basically has this harmony with the solar path, pretty much. And so
Well,
on
that
one
brings
side
up
you have
Cancer.
Scorpio, on the other side you have Arachne potentially. So on both sides you have this Scorpion, and then you have this Spider. So that's kind of another interesting like parallel between the two.
That brings up Cancer, like the height of summertime
Mm.
would be like the thing in the middle. And if you think about the three fates of the Moirai, you've got Clotho, the spinner. You've got Atropos, which would obviously be the stinger. And then what's in the middle? I think the middle part would probably be that crab symbolism because it's sort of always moving. The crabs make massive migrations. They're the measurers of distance.
Which
Ooh,
in
nice. I love that.
Egyptian times was the scarab beetle, the symbol of rebirth.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting you bring that up too, because there's a relationship with Scorpio, the scorpion, and a lot of other words that begin with sk. I made a whole entire video about this. So, like skin, to skin something, I guess skin came from skinning, which came from the fact of skinning an animal, like with a blade, right? There's always this penetrative sort of thing. So, screw, scalpel, scar, to scold somebody, right? Even like skull. There's a lot of words that begin with sk, this sound, and actually relate to Scorpio or the scorpion, or have some sort of correspondence like that. So scarab beetle, I would say, is like another one, right? So they're both water signs, the Cancer and then Scorpio.
Right.
So that was one weave that I just wanted to get off my chest, with everything. The World Wide Web, right? What we're on right now too.
Very
And
much.
so is this a snare? Is this a trap of some sorts? Reality itself has been likened to a web or like a fabric that's woven and things like that. So I think that's another interesting, correspondence with everything. The spider resting in the middle of a web has been likened to like the center of the world or the center of the universe, which I think is really interesting,
The
which puts
axis
it in
mundi.
line. Yep, with the axis mundi as well. Yeah, exactly right. The number 8 too has been a thing that I think is just really intriguing. Some people have said that if the number 7 has all of this mystical stuff going on with it, there's alchemical processes that make use of 7 steps, right? It's said that there's 7 colors to the rainbow, but I'm learning that there's actually 6 colors, but the 7th color is actually like invisible. It's kind of the etheric transcendental color, basically. Again, Ursa Major and Minor, they each have 7 stars. You've got the 7 traditional planets, 7 days of the week, right? It goes on and on and on. There's actually a number of myths that incorporate 7 spiders or 7 scorpions. So I guess when Isis was looking for Osiris's body parts, that she brought 7 scorpions along with her. And then in one of my books too, there's a old spell that I came across, and you say the scorpion's name or the person you're trying to basically like hex 7 times, and then it'll go out and sting the person that you're actually trying to sting and inflict damage on. So there's a number of things when I was reading through my books, I'm like, wow, there's the number 7 again. 7 spiders or 7 scorpions or something along those lines. 7 chakras, right? So the number 8 might be like the destination of going through 7 steps, basically. It's almost kind of like the apex or pinnacle or something along those lines. Once you go through those 7 different tiers or gradients or processes or whatever. So I think that's kind of intriguing.
The Book of Enoch, or the books of Enoch, I should say, the Slavonic Enoch, they specifically talk about there's 7 days of creation, and then there's an 8th day of timelessness or rest. But the entire Enochian system is based around sevens or 777.
Got it. Yeah, that makes perfect
Yeah.
sense. Exactly. I've
Well,
heard that they put it.
8 and 13 would have a lot in common then, wouldn't they? Because they break the cycle.
Right.
Exactly. Yep, that's how I see it too, for sure.
The system of music that we use now too, right, is got 7 notes, but it's called a set of octaves. And
Right.
so the 8th in
Yeah.
that, not only is it symbolic, but in that structure, the 8th is leading to the next level, as you kind of alluded to, Mario.
Excellent. Yeah, man, I'm super into it. I've also heard people refer to this as the 8th climb. I'm not even sure what that word means. CLIME. But
Yeah, I've
in
read
one
that
of my
before.
books, he refers to it as the 8th climb once you get to that point. And then I think Rudolf Steiner has a thing about the 8th sphere, which sounds like it could be related to some of this business as well.
Well, I always think about the 7 spheres as lacking the 8th part, of course, which is us, Earth, right? Having that structure to it too, and in a Taoist kind of reckoning, embodying the 8 levels is understanding the 8 elements of the I Ching, and that really, and this whole process has a divination path towards it, about it, but it also teaches us essentially to walk softly, relative to the world, and then the world is not as impactful in regards to us. And the spider in Taoism has a very respected life, in that it creates with its mind from its body, and it really illustrates the something that we can all seek to embody, the Wu Wei process. Right, it sets up its web. It doesn't work more than it needs to, and it is patiently receptive. Going back to what you're saying with that feminine energy. So
Energy
the whole Wu
conservation.
Wei, yeah, the whole Wu Wei idea is having the most result from the least tedious effort and useless effort.
I like
Gotcha.
that.
Yeah, I love that too. You had mentioned something before the stream about a Native American myth or deity that's related to the spider
Yeah,
being a grandmother, right?
Yeah, the Hopi, and actually the reason why I can never pronounce Hopi words is because of their ski and W's, and they all have this word. I cannot pronounce it. Has a ski in it, I believe. But the spider grandmother, of course, embodies the feminine and combines and then separates with the sun god of the Hopi tradition to create all life, to weave all life, and she spins out from her web all the people and all the tribes, and in symbolic kind of relationship, she brings all humanity out of the 4 caverns into the first world, and then there we are in the 4th world now, according to the Hopi. And the spider grandmother, of course, brings us in kind of this Orphic, even up and down manner that we've been touching on recently. She brings us into the underworld and saves us from these cataclysms, and then brings us back up. And so the Hopi, and in the Southwest and in many different Native American cultures, they have similar spider woman divinities, but none so as specific or articulated maybe as the Hopi. which the Hopi have a prophecy too about that one day the spider web will cover the earth. And I believe all their prophecies are when this happens, good things might occur. And if this happens, not too good things might occur. So I think that's what has kind of gained them respect. But the prophecy I was alluding to is about one day the Turtle Island in North America will be covered by a spider web. And for many decades, it was noted to be the telephone poles and the electric poles. But in recent times, of course, it's been related to the World Wide Web. One more. The Hindus, they believe that the spider and the spider web is like the as you mentioned too, Mario, the veil between Maya and Nirvana, right? It's the very dimension that we pass through these energies, and it all that reminded me of the very famous eight-legged animal that's not real, the Slipnir of Odin, who's of course related to eight and all that, but his horse has 8 legs in order to transverse these dimensions. It is said. So that I appreciate you letting me share that. So
Yeah.
it kind of relates.
For sure, man. No, that's excellent. Yeah. A couple of my books brought up some of those things that you just brought up too. Yeah, I mean, the other thing I wanted to mention is this spin dynamic, and if we're talking about kind of like transversing or going through different like realities or thresholds or whatever you want to say, there's a huge parallel with this sort of opening or gateway with the world axis, what people refer to as that. And so when you're talking about spinning, everything, whatever spins, has to have an axle. It has to have a fulcrum. It has to have a point of pivot. And so one of my books was saying that literally the word spider comes from an old English word, spithra, which literally means spin. And then in German, the word for spider, I guess, is like spin or spinny or something like that, SPINNE. So literally just going back to this spinning sort of dynamic. So again, nothing can rotate, nothing can revolve without this sort of axis in the middle, which the more I learn about symbolism, so many things go back to axial symbolism, like a point of pivot, and I would say mother is the hub of the wheel. She just is. Mom is the hub of the wheel with the family unit. In many ways, she makes the world go round. Even in the world card, in the tarot, you have a woman in the middle of this wreath around her, right? It's like it wouldn't make sense to me symbolically to have a man there, but it makes all the sense in the world to have a woman there. And oftentimes she has like a cloth wrapped around her. So I see a lot of world axis symbolism and axial symbolism, hub of the wheel symbolism with woman, like through and through big time. And I'm coming across a lot more information about woman and her relationship with the pillar, which the pillar essentially is like an axle as well, pretty much.
Right.
Well, I think that Clotho angle, the spinner angle, has to do with the repeating cycles of time, right? And that's sort of how we get trapped in that spider web, is that continual repeating, that continual going back. But I have pulled up here the spider Kachina from the Hopi. In Hopi mythology, Spider Kachina is a significant figure associated with creation, fertility, and wisdom, often depicted as a Kachina doll carved in wood figurine adorned with feathers, cloth, and other embellishments. According to the Hopi legend, Spider Kachina is a manifestation of Spider Grandmother, a powerful and benevolent deity that played a crucial role in the creation of the world. Spider Grandmother is said to have brought life and order to the world. What's really interesting is that the Hopi are very, very in tune with keeping the cycles of tradition. So they'll have like 8-month long rituals that people can come see at the very end. And I have a special connection to the Hopi. Back in 2001, me and my mom went out to Arizona, to actually see Old Arribi, the oldest city in the United States, over 800 years old, continuously lived in. Right now, it's basically a trailer park. They've moved all their trailers up on this butte, and on top of this butte, this is where the oldest city existed. So they have a bunch of hogans outside of the buttes, but they have to maintain their ritual presence there because that's how they maintain their connection to their gods. So when me and my mom went there, it was in January, and in January there's not much tourism out there. But when we showed up, they welcomed us in like family, and we actually got to see a naming ceremony for one of the babies that was just born, because we were there to get a raven kachina. And so, they bring us into their home, they feed us beaky bread and beans, and like I've never met these people in my life, and they're treating me like family. So it was a magnificent experience.
Nice. Yeah, I bet. Hey, Headless, you're pretty knowledgeable with Greek mythology, right?
A little bit.
Is Arachne? Do you know
Yeah.
much about that specific myth and her contest with Athena?
Not at all. Let me know what it is.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do know a little bit about that, but you
Oh,
can
do
go
you?
ahead. Go ahead, Mario.
Okay, right on. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know too much, but I just reread like several accounts of it, just like really quick summaries of what the deal is, looking into the spider thing. And
Well, they're
so
both spinners. They
that's
had
right,
the
exactly.
contest, right?
Right.
Exactly right. Yeah. So Arachne was a young woman, and she was an excellent spinner. And so she created tapestries that were beautiful. And basically, she challenged Athena to a spinning contest. And one of the versions that I read was that they both created this tapestry, and it was declared that they were equal and that it was essentially like a tie. And
And
so Arachne could.
Athena could find no flaws in her weaving,
Wow.
and she
Right.
got enraged. So, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And so basically the fact that she didn't win and that it was a tie completely like was devastating to her. So she actually hung herself, which is really interesting given, all of this stuff. And so I mean, given the nature of the spider and what it does. And so apparently she was basically preserved in the constellation Arachne, which I don't have any books that actually acknowledge this constellation, by the way. I just
Mm.
looked, and for some reason they're not there.
And
Well,
that original,
out of our 88 constellations, only 35 are Greek.
Mm,
So the vast majority were later, but the Greeks actually had like 135 constellations.
Mm.
And so we don't really have access to a lot of that knowledge because we don't go back to the Greek astrological comparisons.
right.
But I
The
think when it comes to Arachne, it really has a lot to do with the idea of fate. And I think it was Athena that challenged Arachne because Arachne boasted about
boasted,
how
yeah,
much
yeah.
better she was. Yeah.
And that
Gotcha.
original tale comes from Ovid's Metamorphosis.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting too. So let me see here. I'm gonna
There's
cruise
a
through
sense
my
of
notes.
pride.
He didn't have something to say. I saw him unmute his mic. I didn't know if he was trying to say something before or not. But
Oh yeah, sure. Thanks,
yeah.
Nick. No, I want to say, Mario, in tantric astrology, like this, what you're saying is opposite of Fucus or Arachne is actually considered an invisible constellation. And it is considered part of the Pleiades, considered part of the Matrikas, but it's empty. She is empty. So she is eight, like she's eight limbed. And I just posted a picture. Nick just retweeted it on the rejects thing so people can go look on the feed so people can go look at it. But she's really nine. She's not really eight because she always has a consort. There's always the implication of a consort in all tantric images, whether they are depicted or not. Now, I'll teach people just a little trick to looking at iconography. If they hold a trident and the trident has the prongs closed, that means that usually that the consort is implied. If the prongs are open, that means they are receptive to receiving the lightning strike or the consciousness of the consort. So you can see that there's always an implication. And it's interesting because in the Mahavijaya system, Matangi, who is the goddess that I'm referring to, she plays a sitar, and it's considered that she controls the rajas. The rajas are the Carnatic sort of compositions of the old of South India, that were adopted into these kind of Vedic ritual grammars. So she would sort of rearrange the grammars. And even in her story, she's described as a Chandali, as an outcast, as a tribal goddess, meaning that she is part of the Pleiades, but she's actually not. She's actually from outside of the civilization. She's outside of the container of who they are. So it's something that it exists in a liminal space. It's more of a reflection of what happens at the sun, and that she gathers all the ritual grammar. Maybe you could say the ritual grammar of Mercury, or maybe you could say the ritual grammar of like a higher source, and she puts it together, and that is the song she plays, and then that is what creates like the Maya or the illusion around us.
Right. So when it comes to the sitar, it's like closing and opening. So that's what I feel when you're talking about that. It's like the waves of it itself. It goes from so far out to so far in within one single stroke of the sitar that I really feel that.
Jin, what you were saying about the consort, I don't know if this is related to it, but whenever I think of any number, you know, if I'm thinking of the 3, I think of a triangle. If I'm thinking of the 4, I think of the square, right? The hidden consort is always that center point, right? So with any number, every number has a relationship with that next additional step, that next number, right? So the 8 has a relationship with the 9, 9 with 10, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Is that kind of related to what you're saying by chance?
Absolutely, and I think it even relates to your point about the 4 and the 8. So like, sorry, I did a little numerology. The 13 and the 8, but in the more Western way. So because 8 is Hod, it's the 8th sphere, and then 13 has a secret meaning where it's Chesed, but it's the 3 plus 1. So fire, earth, and water in synthesis produces the secret 4th thing, which is air. But this is also related to Vajra, lightning, or perception. So there's an interrelationship, and even what Hedla said about the naming of things, that's a property of Hod. Like you would name something, call something into reality, into form with its proper true name, if you want to say it like that. And so, but it would be reflected or bounced off the ocean that is Chesed or is Jupiter. So
That goes
there's
into the
absolutely a dialectical relationship with the way the numbers work, and also, yes, definitely the consort. And I was thinking it's so interesting because I'm working on an Aeon of the Daughter series right now, and just thinking about, like you're saying, there's a lot of mother energy, and I think for me, I think of it as more of a daughter energy, but I think it's like a very interesting formulation, like because they are the same in some ways, but then they also have important like distinctions. So I think that's very interesting and corollary.
well,
The
when you're talking about the naming goes into the Clotho angle. This is the spinning. When you're naming something, you're sort of spreading it out and opening it up, because then you have the access to it. And like he was saying, it's the naming of the thing is what spins and weaves the universe. So I think that goes into the deeper meanings behind some of that sympathetic magic.
I was going to interject really quickly. Speaking of sympathetic magic, can you hear me? Okay. Um, so most of the Mesoamerican natives, they also practice sympathetic or imitative magic, or whatever they saw, they worshipped, or they put into practice, into rituals or whatever. And it seems like whatever they feared was a god to them, right? Because whatever was, I guess, strife or whatever, that was punishment by the gods, so to speak. But however, when you talk about the spider within Aztec culture, you see the naming of the great goddess being associated with the spider. And so that, from what I understand, is she was associated with darkness and the underworld. But when you say, oh, she was associated with darkness in the underworld, it was mainly they were attributing her to birth, because within the underworld, they had 9 levels and it was supposed to represent the 9 months of gestation. So anything below was to bring forth, and the earth itself was mother. And so whatever came forth, whether it was coming out of the earth or out of a cave or whatever, they associated that with birth, mother giving, and so forth. And so that's why they considered or have a lot of the depictions of the great goddess being associated, from what I've read, with spiders. And I think like her shield has webs on it and stuff like that. So I do remember that. And then, so that, the Spanish kind of documented that when they first arrived in Mexico around 1520s or something. And then later, I think it was 1530s, in Peru, you start to see the report of the Nazca lines, right? And you see the line, the big from up above, you can see the lining within that area of Peru, and you see a spider being associated with a lot of the other morphologies that were carved into the side of cliffs. So yeah, it was a big deal even to the natives of Latin America or Mesoamerica, South America too.
Absolutely.
I want to just jump off of what Lisa was said, which was so great, which was about the mother and darkness, because I think you see this a lot in Tantra, especially like people's misperceptions of like what that means. And I think Lisa's right on where she's saying it's about birth, it's the birth canal, it's the outer darkness sort of that you first perceive, but it's not really darkness because there is light in the womb and there is sort of luminescence that is within the body, like a bioluminescence that I think the baby even sees. So, but when they come into the artificial light, if you're having it specifically, I'm thinking in a hospital, then that is really you're piercing the veil kind of. So yeah, I think that her association with darkness is an antinomian, and I think this is true in Buddhism in the sense that she is very much like connected to the Astarte or Lilith myth, but she's antinomian only in the way that she's completely non-dual. Like she's completely she both accepts and rejects form, but it's sort of neither nor, rather than she's not in an extreme. So she is the one who said the first words or spoke the sound, but it's called sound without view, meaning that it doesn't have, like, it's not contained by a klipa, it's not contained by a skanda, is what we would call it. There's no aggregation around it, so it's just like a howling wolf or a howling or whistling. Sometimes it's described as whistling. So it's not a word as we would understand. It's a sound, and that's sort of the reverberation. You could say even of the heartbeat in the womb, there's like that sound, and maybe that's what that even is.
Well, there's something antinomian about ambush predators, right? I mean, it's like you wait for them to be attracted to your flame or your source of light, and then you catch the prey. And if you think about this grandmother imagery, it's like you have to be caught in form so that you can experience this life. And so the web or the weaving is sort of like the basis of all material plane things. I mean, that's a very Gnostic view of things, but that's pretty accurate.
I was going to say, if one more, the commentary, yes, thank you for highlighting that, Magic. Yes, that is absolutely correct. The Spider Woman of Teotihuacan predates the great goddess of the Aztecs, and I believe it leads back into the Toltec and even before them, the Olmecs as well. So you're talking about 100 BC. That's a long, long time ago, and most of these codices that they've read through or whatever have that indication in there. So, yeah, thank you very much for reminding me about that.
Jin, what were you saying regarding maybe the whistle or a screech or a howl or something like that? It's more primal, right? That's the idea.
Yeah,
Than
it's the primal sound. It's the primal sound. It's not the word. But in one way of thinking, her daughter or her great granddaughter, she is the one who forms the word. So it's like the third cause. Nick, Robbie, and I actually spoke about this the other day. So I'm sorry, guys. But the word is considered to be sort of the third or the fourth cause, depending on how you understand the ordering. So yeah, but so hers just the sound that penetrates the outer darkness. Comes down, it forms material reality. But like Buddhism is Gnosticism, especially like tantric Buddhism, but it's not Gnostic, and there's no dual. It's non-dual. There's no. We embrace that there's an idea of the carnal ground and the garden at the same time. It's just how you perceive of it, or how you view it. So it's really about perspective rather than like being in a fixed way of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Either you're caught in the net or you caught the net. One of the two.
One thing I do find interesting, I just want to mention real quick that you brought it up and it just popped into my head with the howling and the wolf. I'm just wondering, like, even thinking about like the howl and stuff. I mean, you hear musicians say it, and like I get it, but I also think there's like doesn't necessarily mean you need breaks. But like you'll say like if it wasn't for the space between notes, there'd be no music. So that howl, there's actually not much space. So like in a sense, to me, it's actually more free of form because it's just one long sound without anything breaking it up and changing it. So I even wonder if that's like something to think about.
Yeah, I agree with what Nick just said. It was quite deep, and like she is pervading all space. That's one of her like epithets. Like she is the primordial space that exists within. So just like what Nick said, it's like it's continuous, it's ongoing. It fills everything.
Right.
Who could stop the vibration of the monochord?
Speaking of sounds and even silence and stuff like that, one of the things that I think is really interesting in older tarot decks, if you look at the major arcana, the death card is the only card that does not have a title. It doesn't have a name. And this is actually related to the scorpion because there are some cultures where like the folk sort of like idea was that you did not actually say the scorpion's name, that it was an animal that you left unnamed because they thought that if you named it, if you actually said scorpion, that you're basically invoking death, something along those lines. And so you don't say death's name because otherwise it's going to come for a visit, and you don't say the scorpion's name as well. And these two things are so interlocked with each other that I think that's an interesting correspondence. So there's that whole side of things too, which I think is intriguing. And then also too, related to just kind of more like folky stuff that has been like around for such a long time. But I read in one of my books that there are genital mutilation rituals where the clitoris would be cut or snipped, and then the blood that comes from that wound was referred to as the scorpion's venom. And so they made a direct link with the scorpion's venom and then that blood. Similarly, the exact same thing with circumcision rituals as well, referring to it as scorpion venom. And so this is something that's been seen at least in a couple of different cultures. My understanding from what I recall that it was some African tribes were doing that. So just to show you the relationship of how deep the scorpionic weave is, once again with the genitals and sex and everything else, it goes way back.
Well, Lisa, what about the recurve of the coccyx? Right? It comes back in sort of like a scorpion stinging itself.
Yes, it does. Yeah, on the latter part of the spinal column. What I was going to say about the scorpion venom, it's interesting that you say that because usually most of the sensory part of the genitalia is predominantly neurological, right? It doesn't show to have a lot of capillary systems in terms of bleeding, but a lot of capillary systems for the sake of sensory, right? And so if you look at the venom of scorpions, scorpion venom is neurotoxic. It is not hemotoxic. And so it's interesting that they wouldn't say it's snake venom, but it's scorpion venom. Whereas I'm not very familiar with all of the snakes of Africa because you said that the ritual was practiced in Africa. But I do know, at least in the Americas, you do have more hemotoxic venom, then you do neurotoxic. Not to say it's not here, but in terms of Africa, it would be interesting that they made the distinction between scorpion and not snake.
Well, hemotoxic would be more like vipers, right?
It depends. It depends which viper. Yeah, how they use it. Because cobras are neurotoxic, rattlesnakes are hemotoxic. You do have coral snakes that are neurotoxic, and then you do have, which is the other ones? Jen, I'm running a. I think there's some in India that are mainly neurotoxic, but you do have some hemotoxic. Um, Most of your mambas are neurotoxic.
Yeah, mambas are definitely I think mambas actually have all three. I
Okay.
think that they're just like super, like they're just one of those crazy venom ones.
Mm.
If
Right.
I recall correctly, I might be
Okay.
wrong.
Well, these are all independently developed venoms too, as well, which is
Right.
really interesting about snakes.
Yeah,
What
they're
about
all
the sea snake? What's the sea snake? Because I think that's the key, the
yeah,
sea crops.
majority of those are neurotoxic.
There you go.
Again,
That would make
like
sense.
I believe neurotoxic, like I said, neurotoxic is much more popular on the older world versus the new world is more hemotoxic.
Hmm.
I again, I'm not very fluent in my reptiles. I need to brush up
Hmm.
on that. But yeah, from what I
Do you
remember.
know why it's called herpetology? When herpes is left untreated, it looks like snakes as it
Hmm.
erupts from the skin.
Whoa.
So it makes the little snakes going all through it. So herpes and herpetology goes, back to the same origins.
Hmm.
Well,
Hmm.
all for
Interesting.
this headless is that that is not considered a snake disease in Chinese medicine, but it is considered a scorpion medicine because of the orientation of the boil. So, like that would be a yang. If you have a uprising inflammation, that would actually be like a more associated with scorpions or centipedes. And so there's an idea that you use like to treat like. So in some of those formulas, they will include like pulverized and dried scorpion or pulverized and dried snake. But snake diseases are more of like rough hewn, like psoriasis is a snake disease.
Yes.
So I haven't studied enough of the Native American animal classifications, but that does also exist in Native American like herbal medicine in Dan Mormon's book. He touches on it a little bit. So that would be interesting for someone. Like I know a few of them, but the snake ones I'm not familiar with. So it would be interesting to sort of look at that and see if there's a corollary between like venom remedies as well as the animal itself.
I do know, like, I spent some time with an Amazonian shaman in Peru, and they also believe in that the disease resembles the actual animal that cures it. So, I mean, he even showed us, like, the sting of this bark or blah blah. No, I'm sorry, the sting or the bite of this snake, and he held out, dead snake. They had the checkerboard or whatever of it. He's like, it's cured by this bark, and then he placed the bark right next to the actual snake, and the two corresponded. And so the I think you hear the one about the kidney, breaking up kidney stones or whatever, and they don't have anything like some ailment with kidney stones, but yet they already knew that these beans helped with kidney stones. So stuff like that it looks similar to what the ailment was. So yes,
Right.
even in Meso, at least the natives of from Mexico on down.
That's
There,
awesome.
there's a Bible quote too, Luke 10:19, that really brings these two energies together, and it reads almost like a healing blessing. Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and all and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. So
Hmm.
it like
Ethan,
beckons to all
that's so
that.
touching because even the shaman himself, he said two things. He said God is very kind to the naive mind, and then he said everything on earth God has placed for the purpose of curing. So
Right, beautiful.
it very, yeah, that was very it correlates very well with
Yeah,
what he
yeah,
says.
exactly correlates. I hate to leave early, but I have to depart and take care of some responsibilities. An honor
Hey,
to be here with you guys, and I apologize.
Thanks for being here, Ethan.
thanks
We
for
love
being
you.
here, Ethan. Yeah,
Thanks.
Great
Much love, you
contributions,
guys.
dude.
I'm
care.
gonna continue listening as I take care of my stuff. So, good night, everybody. Apologies.
You're good.
Thank you,
See ya.
Ethan.
Thank you, Ethan.
Yes.
Now, while we're on the subject of the Bible, when you look at when Noah went into the ark, it was in the sign of Scorpion, and then there was the great dying or the passing over into the new system. And then also when Jesus, as far as Judas, the kiss of Judas, that was also said to happen when Scorpio was in the sky, and the sting of the Scorpio, it is you get that kiss look, that kiss type pattern. So
Excellent. No,
Two
exactly
red
right.
lips.
yeah,
Yeah, and deceivers and traitors and stuff are associated with the scorpion and scorpionic things.
right.
The whole thing with the cure for different ailments having like a symbolic relationship with whatever it is you're talking about. Some people refer to that, you might already know this, but for the audience, as the doctrine of signatures. And so there's all sorts of amazing examples out there. So it's definitely the real deal for sure. One of the things regarding Venom, and Lisa, I'd love to hear your opinion about this, but in my symbolic reference books, there's so many examples that I have where they say that back in the day, people used to create a ring of fire around a scorpion, and the scorpion would sting itself to death. Now, I read this many times, and I've actually made posts about this, like on my Instagram and things like that. And people confirmed and have said, hey, I've seen this for myself. My grandmother used to do this. When I was a kid, I used to do this. People from like, Mexico and like Central America and stuff like that. And I have videos. I found videos of this happening, not with fire, but with a container, like a glass bowl or something like that. And the scorpion is stinging itself. Yet every single mainstream source online, every single source online says that this is impossible. It doesn't happen. This is only like sort of like urban legend type stuff or folklore or something like that. And people have had different things to say. They've said, well, if it's surrounded by fire, it's actually so hot that it's kind of like seizing because of just the temperature, and it looks like it's stinging itself, but that the venom cannot hurt itself because it creates its own venom. So it's like immune to it, basically. And so I've heard different things from different people and different sort of ideas about what is maybe going on there or what isn't going on there. If you have any thoughts, I'd just love to hear it.
In terms of physiologically, in terms of scientific literature, I have not seen anything, but I remember my family, my grandmother speaking about that.
Oh,
And talking about, the little folk, whatever, that in terms of stinging itself. But see, I have also heard that the individual scorpion itself cannot die from its venom. However, you do have courting whenever scorpions mate, and they hold each other's stingers away from each other. So apparently, it is somewhat of a, you know, uh, poisonous to each other. So I don't know if it's something individual. Jen, I don't know if you know anything about that, but I mean, I'm pretty sure you do, but I'm just saying that I don't recall anything. What I do know about scorpions is that they are one of the few arachnids that has remained unchanged, if you believe in the fossil record. That I believe that in over 500 million years, they have not changed. And so it's one of the few arachnids that has remained virtually unchanged, evolutionarily speaking. And then their exoskeleton, you can see it with UV. And I
Yeah,
think that
that's what
is also more of I guess, a defense mechanism as well. So birds, obviously, if they can see UV, they can spot scorpions. So that's also one of those predator prey dynamics.
Well,
But
I think
Jen,
that's more of the emperor scorpion, isn't it?
I believe
There's
it's
two different types that really dominate. It's the brown yellow kind, and then
Mhm,
the
mhm,
black kind. And the black kind
mhm.
is the more UV reactive.
I think both of them are, whereas one of them probably dominates in terms of how much fluorescence they emit.
Gotcha. Okay. Jin, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you, Mario. I just want to say, and also great job, Lisa. And I will synthesize what something Lisa said with something what Mario said, is that there's this idea. So I don't know if the which scorpion. I thank you, Lisa, for thinking that I'm so knowledgeable about zoology. I'm really not, but it's flattering. But there's an idea in tantra that the scorpion represents like the first words, or maybe the like creative and destructive words, that they both can be contained in the same sort of vessel. So when you speak them, it's sort of like speaking a scorpion into the world. So if you misuse the words if you misuse the words improperly, or without holding to dharmic ideas, the the idea is that the scorpions will come back and sting you, or that they will return to you, or you will be eaten by that kind of wolf slash scorpion queen that I also tweeted, so people can go look. And so I think that there's a idea of the oath breaker in that, and that's the corpse she stands on. Like every Dakini has a corpse that they stand on, and she stands on the oath breaker. But it's not like an oath breaker as in like you're upholding like a secret society oath. It's the oath of the dharmic rules which we're all subject to. So that's sort of the idea. It's like if you're breaking the covenant that exists with all of us, then, and using the words of creation or misusing them, then you will suffer the repercussions. So I think maybe there's even something in the Mesoamerican story about that, like because there seems to be like a power of repelling negative sorcery or turning it backwards or into itself. So I definitely think that there's something there.
Well, I think on a tangent from what you just said, I think it's important to note that the scorpion has an eye on its tail, and the spiders have 8 eyes. And
Mm.
I think that should talk a lot about the dharmic repercussions of what you're doing. And also, it should go directly over to Nick to talk about the eye, because if you think about these things in terms of the number of eyes and how they relate to one another and how they relate to the rest of the world, that's an interesting correlation, especially if you think about them as being proto brains that would grow into other things from that point, and being one of the oldest creatures of the planet and having an eye on the tail.
I like that. I never knew anything about the eye and the tail. To tell you the truth.
Logical, real deal thing. They have an eye on their tail.
Yeah.
Wow. Damn, that's amazing. I've never heard that before.
Mm.
Well, think about it. These are the most like deadly creatures in terms of mythology. They've got to have an accurate targeting system, or else they're fucked, you know. And that's their weapon, you know. They're the backbiters, and they've got to
Right.
be able to sting exactly where they want to go.
Wow. That's incredible. I got to look into that, man. That really is fascinating. So one of the things related to the venom suicide sort of conversation is alchemists have associated Scorpio with like the blackening or
Mm.
Negretto
Negretto.
step, right? And I was just reading too that apparently this concept of scorpion time was a thing for the alchemists as well, and that this was like a major sort of transformative aspect to whatever it is they were like transmuting and things like that. And so people have kind of likened this potential suicide dynamic with the scorpion of being able to change things, you know, dynamically, and rapidly, pretty much, right, on their own accord. And so I think that that's kind of an interesting sort of thread. And obviously, what is death, right? It's a huge change, you know. And so you're going through a major cycle upon death. And so in that way too, I kind of see it that the scythe of death itself is not unlike the stinger of the scorpion. And there's actually huge correspondence I see with Saturn, and kind of like Father Time type figures and stuff like that with Scorpio. So there's like interchangeability, kind of between these two ideas, I would say. Um, the other thing I was going to bring up too that I think is interesting is a lot of people have said that Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio were once considered like one huge constellation, and
What?
then kind of like a sword, Libra being introduced almost split up this huge constellation
Yeah.
into three smaller constellations, which is fascinating too because Virgo and Scorpio both have glyphs that look like M's, right?
Hmm.
And so Virgo looks like a glyph with an M with like a fish. Some people have different opinions about what that is. To me, it's opposite Pisces. So I think there's a Piscean sort of dynamic with that. It's almost like her child, it's almost like Christ, Virgo and Christ or something. And then with Scorpio, you have the glyph with the M with the sort of like stinger. Or to me, it almost reminds me too of the arrow of Mars, the glyph for Mars, right? But you have these two signs, and one sign, Virgo, is on the light side or day side of the zodiac, and then Scorpio is on the night side of the zodiac. And what do you know? They're opposite of each other, um, on both sides of Libra, the scales. So it's almost
Right.
like they weigh each other out. So it's almost like the light mother and the dark mother, or something along these lines.
Absolutely. You nailed it right there because the M is one of the oldest glyphs for feminine energy.
Hmm.
Yep, absolutely. Mom, right? Mama. So,
The waters.
yes, exactly right. 100%.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I've heard too, M. I don't know if it's exclusively the only sort of letter phonetically. I think so, where it's more internal. It's almost more receptive in and of itself, right?
Hmm.
Versus, a lot of other sounds, more projective, more masculine.
Mem is the 13th letter of the Hebrew alphabet.
That's right.
Wow.
There you go. And that's the letter that
Speaking of them,
corresponds with also the death card, the 13th card.
Hmm.
So yeah, exactly. There's a whole that 13 weave is strong.
Well, in the with the 13s, you have going back to Jesus and the 12 disciples. You have Washington D.C. with the 13 colonies. You have this perpetual idea of death and rebirth based around the number 13.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think of the American eagle, and I'm
Mm,
like, this is one of the expressions of Scorpio is the eagle,
yeah,
right? And so that to me in and of itself is kind of intriguing too, right? So you look on the dollar bill or the seal
yeah,
of the US, 13
exactly.
arrows, 13 stars, 13 olives and 13 leaves, and then literally that eagle right there, emblematic
Yep.
of Scorpio potentially.
Well, I think there's a lot of yin yang energy and a lot of different kinds of polarities when it comes to Scorpio and eagles, sky and earth, because there is
Mm,
definitely an earthy feel to both spiders and scorpions. Like it's very, very much in form, in matter. They have exoskeletons, and I think that that aspect is really kind of one of the things people don't want to look at in their own shadow is going to be about how they create their webs, how they have their influence, and also who they're fighting the most. Because if you've noticed, I think a lot of narcissistic people always hurt the people closest to them. And that's not an accident. That goes back to very, very deep psychology.
mm.
And another aspect would be the idea that spiders have pets. I don't know if you guys have seen these
Yeah.
videos, but some spiders will actually have pets from other species and
Mm.
they'll feed them and they'll take care of them and they'll, you know, treat them right. What would happen in human evolution if giant spiders made humans their pets?
Hmm.
I love that, man.
It's a
I've never
crazy
heard of
thing
that
to think
either.
about.
The spider pet thing. I'm going to look into that too.
I will say a friend of mine had a tarantula and he kept like a little spiny prickly pear in like a little I don't know what you call just a cactus or whatever with spines. And he would feed the tarantula and the tarantula would place his prey on the spines, almost like a cupboard. So I remember witnessing that behavior of a tarantula, and you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of planning on that. But I was going to say, Headless, to your point about the eye on the stinger, I'd never heard of that, so I looked it up really quick. And apparently, the entire skin of the scorpion is a photoreceptor, or it has many
Yep.
photoreceptors on the skin, and it is referred to as the universal eye.
Wow.
Oh
Yeah.
shit!
I'm not. Think about horseshoe crabs. Horseshoe crabs have proto eyes on the outside of their shells, and
Right.
also that goes back into the crab. You know, they shed their shells, so there has to be some sort of ocular component to them.
Yeah, which is the photoreceptor, which is the retina. You know where the photoreceptors reside in the retina, majority of them. And then you said the horseshoe crabs. Some scorpions and some spiders do not contain hemolytic type properties. They contain more of a cyano or like cyano hemolytic, whatever the what is it, the copper based blood that horseshoe
Right.
crabs have.
Right.
And
They're
then the
Also,
color.
octopi.
what's that, Jen?
Sorry, Lisa, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the color is really significant, I think, in that
Yes.
you're saying the cyanus, like the I'm calling it the fluids. So those biological fluids, like that matches perfectly with like the colors that you would see dripping down. If you think of Kabbalah, like Yesod, it's that dark purple almost,
Mhm.
like very, and then copper is obviously very closely related to Netzach or Venus.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have like
You get
some
copper
really
in.
interesting, yeah.
And then you have a lot of guanine or guano, like in bats, but you have a lot of guanine being excreted in their excrement as well. I do, I remember them shining fluorescence or UV light on the droppings of scorpions, and so they do glow as well.
Hmm.
So you have a lot of very alien-like properties, I think, in my opinion, of these scorpions. And considering that they were also worshipped by the natives in Mexico as well as all the way into Central and South America for a really long time.
Well, think about the structure of the horseshoe crab with that long spine that comes out of its back end that could curve up, into that scorpion-like
Screen light.
massage. And then,
Mm.
everything wants to become a crab for some reason. So you've got cyanocin, which is just, all these different species end up becoming sort of this crab idea. So there's a really interesting combination between, these arachnids and these crab like beings, and they all sort of come from the same sort of root, and they're just branching off and coming back into one another over millions and millions of years.
Mm.
Wow.
That's
The eye thing, man. That is
Yeah,
that
that's
really is
no
that's
doubt.
so interesting,
Yeah.
dude. That's one of
Yeah.
the more interesting facts I've heard in a little while, actually.
That's got me thinking.
Um,
That's how many times you see crabs and lobsters used in occultism now.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Think about
Right,
it, like,
right.
what if that shit goes back to any of that? That's just weird.
Yeah, it is.
I'm gonna be stuck on that for a minute.
And well, I was also going to say the spiders, they've also found that the exoskeleton actually allows them to survive the void of space. So there is some theory that they've actually traveled between worlds.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think the alien thing is really relevant, actually, Lisa.
Mm.
It makes total sense.
Them and
The crossover, you know what it is? It's chitin. Chitin
Mm.
makes up the outside of a crab, and it also makes the
Right.
outside of a mushroom. Mushrooms have chitin on the outside of them. And so what they talk about is these spores from mushrooms being spread throughout the universe, and that is like the seed of life. As they
Right.
rotate in the sun's heat, they'll actually start to spin, and then they'll spin throughout the entire universe and spread chitin
Right.
throughout everything. And so you've got insects made of chitin. We've got fingernails that are very, very close to chitin. And then the bark of a tree, as we were talking about with these different venoms earlier, is also made out of a chitin-like substance, which is, this, what's it called? tree bark. What's it made out of? It's the same thing as cardboard.
Hmm.
I forgot. But they put it in all these supplements, right? They listed
Cellulose.
Cellulose. Yeah.
cellulose. There
Yeah.
you go. Cellulose, chitin, and our fingernails are, like all one molecule off from one another. It's so close. It's ridiculous.
I just wanted to add something that Lisa said that was really interesting that I forgot. I think also Headless said something about it. Is that scorpions are not, even though, yes, I know in Western astrology it is more associated with the earth element, but really they're associated with the sky element. So like a Vajra or fire. That's more of a tantric idea. Is that and fire is the element of transmutation. So things must pass through to come into form. So it's like a preeminent destruction, I think, is a way to describe it. Like something has to be destroyed or die before it can appear in our world.
And what you're saying is very correlative, because they can detect UV light. They are mainly associated with being night creatures, right? They are nocturnal, whatever, because they can detect or they can see UV and better seen at night. But in I believe it's the Olmecs and the Toltecs, they worship the scorpion as being a midnight sacrifice or used in midnight sacrifices. So it's interesting that you said how they're, associated with that. And then scorpions are obviously associated with old desert or dry or equatorial type habitats. You do not find many in the latter parts of the pole, like towards the poles. There's none in
Right.
Antarctica, but you do see a predominance around the equatorial habitats than you do in, extreme latitudes.
The point about the dryness, I think, is really interesting if you look at it from a more maybe not Ophite Gnostic, but maybe just a broader Gnostic cosmology, and in the idea of the barbello and this sort of dried out grandmother emanator husk, like we have very similar to what we have in Buddhism. So I think that's corollary. I think that it's the spent seeds, so all they can be is a little dry. They can't be. It can be replenished, but it requires, as I said, destruction before it can really be transformed.
Mantis shrimp. That goes into the eye too, because mantis shrimp have all those different kinds of cones and rods that can pick up so many different colors that are almost unimaginable to human beings.
Yeah. And they're vicious.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The midnight sacrifice thing is so interesting to me. I've heard that in occultism that sometimes midnight is a reference to essentially the pole, the world axis, polar northern symbolism. And so when people have referenced a midnight sun as an example, that this is actually, it's more of a like a black sun sort of dynamic or something along these lines. So just thought I would throw that out there. I don't know if that's what they had intended or whatever.
Well, and Monica, you're talking about, midnight and all of that. And I think Nick and I have talked about potentially one day talking about covering the different charges of the pineal associated with morning, noon, evening, and midnight. And I believe in facing different directions or whatever. And I believe it is during a full moon at midnight that you face north. And there is some sort of literature talking about how you can charge your pineal by facing north into the moon's light, because a light from the moon itself does feed into the pineal from a biological standpoint and charging. So that's very interesting. You talk about how you have like almost a midnight sacrifice, and then you have that association with the pineal, and then again, scorpions, their exoskeleton have photoreceptors, and the pineal itself, they have discovered, have photoreceptors themselves.
Gotcha.
Well,
right.
When you think about it, I think as we've sort of covered these emanations and evolutions, you got to think of the carapace, or the outside shell, as being related to the aura. And so there is sort of like this idea that the aura is this vision as well as being visible. So I think if you're going to be doing spell work with this stuff, you have to remember that that aura is like the ancient carapace, you know, especially when it comes to our relationship with other people, because that's sort of like how we feel them out. That's sort of the vibe, you know. So even though it's very earthy from a evolutionary perspective, from this perspective, this is how we collect information from the people and things around us.
I'm gonna not beat a dead horse here, but so we're talking about scorpions. We're talking about how they are the universal eye. We're talking about how they have remained unchanged. So if they have lasted, if you believe in this, I do, but so I'm just gonna spit it out there. If you believe that they've been around for more than 500 million years, and you believe the DNA has memory, then that means that they saw what, at least two extinctions,
Right.
and they survived, and they're able to store that event or memory in their DNA over and over and over. And now you're calling them the universal eye, and now you're saying that they can detect all kinds of things in terms of all of the electromagnetic information from the sun. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
Huge symbolism, symbolic, what have you, in
Oh
terms
yeah.
of the scorpion.
The
I
eternal
just
crayon marking its path across the earth.
100%. I just want to add something, Lisa, that what you said was really interesting. It sparked some like memory, I guess, of the midnight sacrifices. Is that the goddess that we spoke about, or I spoke about at the very beginning, Matangi? She is a Chandali goddess, so she's associated with the grove sacrifices, exactly like what you said, like what would happen at midnight. There's even an old tantra, and a Qatari princess was actually caught doing this ritual. Interestingly, there's a newspaper clipping of it. So you find 8 different, I guess, men that fit a specific archetype, birth date, very specifically, and you have relations with all 8, and then you perform whatever the ritual is, and you and then you get a boon from that goddess, but it has to happen at a specific time, which is midnight. It has to happen in the night and in the specific location. So I think it's very interesting about that. And then the idea of the moon phases and where you would face, this is also related to the grove worship, which the goddesses are called the Nitya goddesses, meaning that they're particular phases of the void. That's how it's what Nitya also means. It can mean eternal or void, but it also refers to an internal thing, which is just below your lungs, this kind of like void emptiness that exists like in a pocket, almost like in your body. So it can also refer to that. And then the Nitya goddesses are 9 in number. So whatever the moon phase is, you face that direction and then perform the ritual for that goddess or that face.
Mm. Gotcha.
It's
Excellent
funny.
stuff, man. Go ahead.
I was going to talk a little bit about how evolved folk magic is, because it takes all of these different elements, and just because it's a different sort of a language in expressing it, it's still the same thing. And so the folk magic is like tapping into this root that, you know, all of these different elements sort of play into, but it's not immediately obvious why they would, because it's using very simple language.
Mm.
Now, interestingly, in regard to scorpions and Scorpio, when you look into the Mithra cult, when they sacrifice the yearly bull, there's a scorpion that is actually down at the testicles of the bull, that's stinging the testicles as the bull is dying, to basically encourage the release of the generative force into the cosmos to revivify. And again, we're talking about the idea of dying, passing over, and revivifying. So death and rebirth once again.
Yeah,
This
man.
is my theory.
Absolutely.
I think the baculum, because most mammals have a penis bone. I think the baculum is the original magic wand. If you think about it, everybody's run across a skeleton in the woods before, right?
Oh, yeah.
And what's always missing from that skeleton is the penis bone. So if ancient man is looking at these skeletons, they're thinking, hold on a second. When I killed this animal, there was a penis bone. There's no more penis bone. Something went after this thing. It's highly valued in nature. So maybe the magic wand comes from the baculum idea. If you look at the raccoon baculum, right? It's very much scorpion. It's got the scorpion curve, and it's also, very straight at the end. There's this kind of magical element to the baculum and this generative principle that I think feeds into the idea of the magic wand, and also the flying broom.
For sure. No, exactly right, man. The phallus is a magic wand. They're one and the same. It's energy being sent forth. Right. That's what the wand represents. That's what the phallus represents. I'm so glad you brought up the Mithraic connection, because I have that in my notes too. It's perfect symbolically. It's amazing, because when Scorpio is rising, the bull is falling. Right. And so there's a few things that operate this way. So because Scorpio is opposite Taurus, that dynamic is there. Orion isn't too far away from Taurus as well, and that's the hunter. And he got stung by a scorpion, and that was like, he was a mighty hunter, but the scorpion is what did him in. And so the same sort of dynamic. When the scorpion is rising, Orion is falling. And kind of related to this, actually. So in Taurus, you have two stars that make up the eyes of the bull. One is Aldebaran and one is Ain. Aldebaran is like this huge, massive royal star. And then Ain actually literally means eye, which is interesting. So you have these two stars there. And what I've heard from this astrologer, his name is Ross Ben. I don't know if you guys are familiar with his work, but he's an interesting dude. And he got really into all things related to Philadelphia history and like the founding of this country and like all sorts of stuff, right? And he has a really great presentation. I know he's talked about this a number of times over the years, but one of the things he's tracked is potentially the Declaration of Independence literally being signed at the moment that Aldebaran is rising over the eastern horizon. And that was a deliberate encoding that the founding, or Benjamin Franklin, was trying to do when he signed it, which is interesting because that's when Scorpio is also falling. So again, just the 13 colonies and the 13 business, and just the fact that there's that sort of relationship, I think is kind of intriguing. And the eagle, and as it relates to Scorpio and stuff like that. So something to chew on.
Aldebaran is also known as the bullseye, and it's where we get the word and term bullseye from as well.
Yeah, totally. And then even kind of opposite, not directly, it's not the like polar opposing sign, but Sagittarius being right next to Scorpio, Centaur, my understanding is that Centaur means bull killer. And so there is that dynamic too, that tar in Centaur means like bull, Taurus. So the bull's eye, you can say that Sagittarius, there's a number of claims symbolically of where Sagittarius is pointing his arrow. But one of the claims is that he's pointing it at the bull across on the ecliptic.
Well, that would make sense to have that as being the entropy killer, right? So as you hit the bullseye, what does sin mean? It means missing the mark. But when you're hitting the mark, if you're hitting the bullseye, that's when you're killing entropy.
Right.
There you go. Yeah. Man, this crew is awesome, by the way. I really appreciate everyone's insights.
This one stuff. It's got me thinking too much now.
Right.
Well, like I'm gonna get lost in rabbit holes now after this.
Well, there's so many. That's what I love about these different things. It's the power of association. Everybody has these associations that are just hardwired into our minds because of all of our experiences and stuff.
Right.
And then once we bring them out, we find that it connects to so many other different minds. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is a beautiful thing.
I think I said it on Jin's show. I said in some ways, I said it's almost like an audio version of Crowley 777 when I have this many people on. Because everybody has their own association and their own way of looking at it, and you just get
the layers of symbols upon symbols. yeah, for sure.
Instead of a book,
I think
you just
TJ's the engineer. TJ's
Yeah.
taking this all in, and he's just imagining all of these different numbers and how to construct the thing. It's beautiful. I see his mind working.
Yeah, what are you thinking about? You got anything you want to add, TJ, to this stuff?
Yeah, I'm just well. I mean, I guess I'm like kind of embodying like that Scorpio energy too, where I'm just kind of like sitting in the back, and I'm like, yeah, I'm the spider weaving the conversation in the background. One thing on the gematria to bring up a bit is spider equals 71, and that's the 20th prime. That's like not really that relevant, but spider matches with Babylon, Thoth, Orion, Virgo, Pisces, and Sperm, which were all things that were brought up as far as explaining the spider, and the spider just having to do with that. Like, I think Babylon is a really good match there too, because it's like it kind of is the reality. It's like the Tower of Babel, and we babble on, we speak, right? It fits with that whole kind of thing. And then even with Nick vibing on that, and the Scorpion equals 109. 109 is the 17th prime number. So there we go. We got the number 17. And then Scorpion matches with Reduction, Octopus, Succubus, Labyrinth, Magic 8 Ball, Wormhole, Strawman, Ace of Diamonds. That's just what I had off like the top of my head kind of thing. So it's just cool how it all connects. And then on like the alien thing, like the Scorpion, the spider, and the octopus, these 8-legged things are all very alien vibe. Like it's not just one of them. Like they all have that kind of enigma to them.
What if 17? What if 17 is the last part of that trinity? So you've got 8, 13, and 17. I don't know. There's a connection there.
Yeah, there's definitely a connection there. It's the star falling onto the path, the light traveling from the path from Netzach to Hod, and then it's shooting her arrow into the paths, and then she ends up facing Tifereth, looking at Gavura, or she's looking at Tifereth from Gavura. So there's like this girl there that's like an archer. She's holding, like Mario's talking about, like the Sagittarius, but it's all being rectified at the moon, so it's all like happening. So it is like a Babylon. So and TJ, I don't want to call you out, but you are have a pink background, and as I've said to Nick, pink is the color of synthesis and decoherence. So it is a spectral color. It doesn't exist, but it's something that we construct with our minds. So it's very much related to consciousness or akasha or space or void, which is something that we've perennially, I guess we've been all referencing. So there's something really interesting there.
Well, that's the thing. We're talking about decoherence. 8 would be the decoherence of 7. Right. 13 would be the decoherence of 12. And then 17 would be the decoherence of the double 8, 16.
16, yeah.
It is also the number of creation. So I forgot to say that. It's decoherence, but it's also creative in its capacity, because it's the capacity for love, right? That's the whole idea.
Jen, you just sparked something I totally forgot to say about scorpions. They do practice parthenogenesis, in that whenever there's not a mate around, they can reproduce asexually. Granted, they'll be clones of themselves, but the female is able to participate in parthenogenesis. And I believe, again,
the virgin.
I believe the courtship within, aside from them holding each other's stingers and so forth, I think it's very elaborate from what I remember. I think there is like a thumping to where the female feels the vibrations of the male. There's this whole, it's really long and elaborate. I do know that some of them will subdue the female again, but it's so elaborate and so intricate that it almost like transcends just the fact that it's, just an arachnid. Why the long, courtship? So it's very interesting. I do remember that. I don't know the specifics of it, but
they dance with each other. They like grab claws and circle around, and
it's very elaborate.
Wow, that's incredible. The fact that parthenogenesis is a thing with the scorpion, and then Virgo is right again opposite on the other side of Libra. I mean, that's amazing. Something somebody said just reminded me of the fact that Scorpio season is when we have Halloween and the Day of the Dead. So the idea is that the veil is thin, you know, and Libra has, you know, it's equal parts day and night. It's bringing in the fall, so like the dark side of the zodiac. And then to me, Scorpio is like one of the prime symbols that really embodies sort of like the dark side of the zodiac, if you will, and you know, crossing the abyss or the other side, or you know, whatever it is you want to say. Um, all things related to the Dark Mother, and you know, this idea too, there's a lot of veil symbolism kind of going on, but what veils reveals, what conceals reveals, right? And so things are generated in the dark. You know, you put a seed into the ground, right? Mother Earth. And so the Dark Mother thing is so beautiful to me personally. Kind of related to that too, in Scorpio, you have Antares, another royal star, which is the heart of the Scorpion. And that star is brilliant. I mean, when I used to stargaze way more, I always used to see that. That is like the most flickery star you can find, like in the sky, basically. And I used to have a P900, and so that's like the camera where you can zoom in like crazy. I can't remember the magnification on it, but it's like absolutely nuts. And one of my favorite things was to zoom in on Antares because it's just like this little light show. It's almost kind of like a little rainbow. It's warm. They compare it to Mars, which is kind of interesting too, because Aldebaran has a lot of symbolism related to Mars as well. Actually, you know, they both kind of lean towards the warmer side of things, and have symbolism, you know, that corresponds with that. And Mars used to be like the traditional rulership of Scorpio too. So there's that. But there is a heart dynamic with the Scorpion as well, too. And I think Antares is kind of one of those keys that you can look into to find out more about it.
Something you said, Mario, was really interesting to me about how you say it's the Dark Mother. So in Buddhism, that would represent the first turning. And then the subsequent other turnings, yes, she reappears in a younger form, maybe in the last turning, so the third turning. But for the fourth turning, she has to rectify as the daughter. So there is something really interesting there, and Mars does play a big part in that. And I think Path 22, that path from Chesed to Gabura, that thing that is synthetically perfect in a way, like Lisa was even hinting at this, or not hinting, she said parthenogenesis, something I've been thinking a lot about personally. And just this idea of like what, like if the perfection happens at Tipperith, like that sort of green harmonious color, but then we also say there's this dualistic property where it's control. Like there's a control because there's an illusion. It's not necessarily control as in handcuffs or shackles, maybe, because we can consciously take them off if we want to, as Nick would say. And but you know, like what is sort of the reflection of that? That's so I think there's something in that where it's like, is that parthenogenesis? Is that what that story is kind of talking about? Is this sort of like a sort of thing that we know that we don't acknowledge, like a hidden truth? And because Mario Bar even brought up the world card, well, that in Kabbalah means that's the path of truth. That's like that's what connects us to the moon. That's what connects us to Babylon. So something really interesting also about that, like, is that the truth of humanity? If you want to take it to a speculative place, is it this parthenogenesis, this creation of the, as my friend Sachi would call it, the crystal millennium kingdom? Like, is that the truth? Is like something that we just don't know?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think the universe is feminine. I think the cosmos is feminine, you know. And so even Virgo is the queen of heaven, but then also the queen of earth. So it's like Virgo is above and also below. And to me, the way I look at it, and maybe I've been way too influenced from like the Gnostic creation story or something like that, which there's a lot of parts of modern Gnosticism I don't really care for. But the idea that Sophia basically had this inner light that she created or birthed on her own accord. So she, the universe itself, is also a virgin mother, basically. She has no equal. There was no partner. There was no masculine presence until the demiurge basically was created, right? The sun. And so to me, that makes all of the sense in the world. It also makes sense that men are basically masculine women, pretty much, and that the ovaries descend into testicles. right? And so every embryo starts off as feminine, female, and then turns into a male, basically. So it's like the way I put it is we do live in a man's world with the caveat that it exists within a feminine universe. That's the deal.
Well, I think the feminine would always be the path to parthenogenesis because of its plasticity.
Oh yeah.
If you look at all the different species that have parthenogenesis, it always comes through the female. It's not coming through the male.
And it is not meant, I mean, I hope nobody gets that offended about that, you know, like that we're all inherently female. It's just if you think of it in evolutionary terms, it's easier to defeminize the brain versus already have everything there. So if you have the entire brain that is such a complex and so many different endocrine organs are going to have to talk to each other throughout months and throughout whatever, it's easier to just turn off the lights versus create all of this. And so that's, I think that's what happens. Evolution is always taking the path of least energy needed.
Yeah.
And that's all that is.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of how I view it.
Yeah.
Well, and if you go back into the mysteries and the creation stories of the Egyptians and the Sumerians, there's always this idea of the shadows swimming in the darkness. That is essentially that mother, that, you know, divine feminine force of, you know, what is possible. You know?
Right. Yeah, totally. Even if you look at the strength card, I see the strength card is basically being it's showing you the relationship between two signs, Virgo and Leo. So that is Virgo taming her child, basically. You're looking at mother and child. Who's in control there? It's the woman, it's the feminine, right? And so even when you look at some versions of Leo, which would be the sun, right? The only sign that actually is ruled by the sun, like in the Dendera zodiac, which I know that's like a Greek, they're like the, you know, they took from the Greeks at that point in time and things like that. But Leo actually, it's his tail is being held by a woman, and the little woman actually has a flail in her hand. So she is controlling the lion. This is just like another nod to this whole entire relationship, in my opinion, of like who's really running the show, who has, to me, more magical qualities to them. Men have to go out of their way to learn about the mysteries and tap into that side of themselves. It's way more natural for a woman to be tapped into that. Even just the mysteries themselves, which Scorpio is a sign that's really related to the mysteries and initiation as well. Right. And so to me, the mysteries themselves, that is feminine. You know, it's not masculine, right? It's way more receptive and things like that. And to me, that's a beautiful thing. And a lot of these lodge systems and mystery schools and stuff like that, a lot of them, it goes back to feminine goddess type stuff, you know, not necessarily the masculine.
Right. In Rome, by the time Cybele had basically moved in from Phrygia, she became essentially taken as the mother of all the gods, and all of the mystery systems were incorporated under the mother Cybele.
Right. It's about the preservation of energy, and the receptacle nature of it is the preservation of energy. So on all these different levels, including spiritual, it's the preservation, it's the filling of the cup that takes on these essences. And so it would make sense to me that preservation of energy would be a feminine aspect. Again, it's like the net is set, and then all the rest of the energy flies into it. They don't have to go out. They don't have to. Men waste a lot of energy. We are the number one energy wasters in the universe. But, you know, again, that's necessary for expansion. At the same time, we've got the inclusionary force. If you look up the water wizard, right? The guy who was working on the Nazi bell. Somebody help me out here. He's talking about the implosive force versus the explosive force. Implosive force would be the feminine energy. It would be like the phi energy moving inward versus the explosive force, which would be the masculine energy, which would be wasting all of that radiation into the universe instead of preserving it.
Right, dude. Yeah, exactly. It reminds me of when I learned about involution versus evolution. In school, we're always just taught about evolution. We're not taught about involution and what that is. The case could be made, in my opinion, that the universe actually is involved, meaning that it receded unto itself, it receded into itself, which is actually way more Saturnian. Oftentimes, people refer to the Saturnian as being more restrictive or contractive, which is more polar, once again, versus the Jupiterian expansion, projective, masculine, right? And so it's possible that whatever we're living within, it actually, we're within it, basically. And then within that, there's room to actually have expansion.
Right.
I will just, I can't believe I'm going to be the one to say this, but I am going to, I think there's a dude's rock sort of angle that even, I don't think anyone's denigrating men, but I just think that there is something interesting if you look at the original Sefer Yetzirah and some of the Shrivija texts and also some of the Kala Chakra teachings, that the rectification of the what I call the daughter, but obviously we can call her also the mother. I think it's interesting if you call her virgin mother. It requires the son, and it also requires the father, even in many Gnostic texts, and even in Hypothesis, and even in the Epinoia of Nuria. It says that she contains the mind of the father and the love of the mother, the heart of the. So but it also requires the son. So it's like it's a dialectical synthesis. It's a perfection, you could say, like a theurgical perfection. It's not, it's non-dual in the sense that I think that that's the better, that's my a personal approach to it, is to approach it non-dually, because I think that there's something more interesting about that rather than fixing it into view, saying like, oh, hard masculine, hard feminine, and this is, and the two things will, you know, never be one. Instead of saying it's like a hermaphroditic, I think it's actually complementary rather than a polarity.
Right.
Well, from my perspective, I would add that the feminine is far more utilitarian, which means far colder, right? You don't get that expansiveness. It closes itself off from the outside. So it's not necessarily a purely preservational. It cuts off what is unnecessary. It's utilitarian. So that is kind of the downfall of that motherly energy, or that spiral inward, is it is very cold. That's where you get the dark mother coming out of. So
Well,
there's that angle too.
I'll just say, Headless, that a flower can ride the dragon. So I'll just say that. So there is an expansive element that the mother can take on.
To kind of go based on, Jen had me thinking about this in that, so just to kind of go back a little bit, when you fertilize an egg, all eggs of all females are X,
Right.
all of them. None of them are Y, and so you already start with the basis of of a female embryo, right? And so when you have parthenogenesis, you're not getting any hybrid vigor. You're not getting any polymorphisms. You're not getting any genetic drifts. You're not getting any kind of variation in genetics. And so you are not essentially moving the species forward. If anything, you are holding them still, because any kind of parthenogenesis is a clone of the mother. There is no variation. There is no additional half contribution from the father or from the son. You're basically kind of like, okay, well, no one came around. I never had a suitor. We didn't, mate. I didn't find one, but I'm going to put forth clones of myself to at least propagate enough, hopefully out there, they themselves can find a son or a father or a male. And so that's all that is. It's not like, oh, we don't need men. That has nothing to do with it. If anything, life itself and nature itself requires the duality for propagation and what's it called, preservation of the species itself.
The ultimate power in the universe is the pause button, because when you can pause and just stay in stasis, then you can flourish again once that masculine energy has returned to the system, right? And so that parthenogenesis female energy is the pause button. This is the survival mechanism. It cuts away all that is unnecessary. It cuts away all that is joy and purity and expansive and loving. All this stuff outside, it says pause. And if you think about it, think about UFO experiences. When you're looking at the UFO, what do they hit? The pause button. You don't get to move. You're stuck in that stasis layer. And then whatever happens, they call it lost time.
Right.
There's that element there of lost time when it comes to parthenogenesis and this female energy. Which, it's communism, right? Because communism thinks about hitting the pause, but we need to stop it here and no further. There's no more march of history. We will stop it here. This is the preservation of all energy. It's like, it doesn't work that way, people. You got to think outside of that, because you need that male expansive to actually have the joy that comes along with that Jupiterian energy,
I actually think this could be a great conversation to continue at another time.
Yeah.
Gender symbolism, the nature of what we're talking about. Jen, what you brought to the table, duality, non-duality, this triune sort of thing. I always think of Mercury. Mercury is like one of my favorite sort of like, I don't know, it's a planet, and like the deities associated with Mercury mean a lot to me, right? And Mercury obviously has this androgynous nature, but there's a triune aspect even to that, right? And so
the Trismegistus.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so there's a lot to chew on here with this conversation for sure. And this is something that I would say even traditionally for me, I've struggled with, the chicken or the egg sort of thing, and what came first, what's more important or least important, are they equal, is all this type of stuff. Like, it's just like a continual sort of like conversation in my mind, basically, because I see aspects of all of the things that everyone's bringing up today.
Yes. Well, we did talk about doing Mercury eventually next, so I mean, we could work in that aspect then, maybe when we talk about that. Unfortunately, due to time, I'm going to have to wrap this up in a few minutes at least. I'm supposed to be on another show actually right now. So, was there anything that anybody wanted to cover, like real quick, that was like left out, or that they wanted to say?
I have to correct something. I said that the 109 was the 17th prime. I got my stuff mixed up. The word 17 equals 109. It's not the 17th prime, but the word 17 matches a scorpion. And then 109 is the 29th prime, and 29 has this kind of plutonic element and moon kind of element to it, which we don't really have time to get into. But
awesome. Anything else from anybody else?
I thought that was great, TJ. I just want to say that that's something really interesting. I want to talk about that later.
One thing I just want to say, 8 would be Clotho. That would be the spinner. 13 would be Lachesis, which would be the measurer, the massive cycles. Then 17 would be Atropos, which would be the cutter of things, going back into that Scorpio energy.
Right.
Jen,
I've got nothing else to add, but this was a great time. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Jen, Lisa, Robbie, you want to add anything before we wrap it up?
Oh, I just think it was a great conversation.
Oh yeah. No, so did I. Yeah, there's so many things that I'm stuck in my head. I'm still like stuck from like 30 minutes ago about shit that was said.
And I mean, we could go more into the octopus, the orthropod, kind of the underworld, but yeah, great subject.
Hell yeah. Yeah. Hopefully.
What I will say is that I love the redundancy throughout all cultures of all timelines.
Yeah.
Two species actually transcend time space. So I like that.
Yeah. Well said. And thank you all so much. And thank you, Nick, for inviting me and letting me.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, this was awesome. That's why I wanted to get so many people together. I thought this was amazing. Thank you. Thank you all for really a great night and a whole lot of information. And I hope, the listeners should definitely get something out of this. I hope, I'll give you things to think about. I definitely got a bunch of things to think about, especially with like symbolism and tarot and all sorts of stuff now. So again, thank you all. Everybody here on the show, their links will be in the bottom. yeah, that's the end of another Occult Rejects. And thank you, everybody in the chat. That's what's up. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.